Shellshock Nam 67 is a third-person shooter that was developed by Guerilla Games, published by Eidos Interactive and released on the PS2 and Xbox in September of 2004. This was the first game from the developer that would later go on to find success through the Killzone franchise, but in the case of Shellshock, the phrase "you gotta start somewhere" has never been more applicable. As the name suggests, this game takes place in 1967 during the Vietnam War, and the plot is centered around, well, you know what, it doesn't even matter. You know this story by now. A group of US soldiers, they forge a bond, helping each other through this horrific event. Some of them make it home, some of them don't. You get the impression at times that this game tries to go some places by illustrating how messed up the Vietnam War was, but it doesn't quite deliver, as the story feels somewhat hard to follow, but it is sandwiched with gruesome scenes like this.
To hell with you Americans! Drop the gun! To hell with you all! Shit, man, damn.
I'll be honest, when I found out that Guerilla Games had put this together, I was instantly more excited to play it, but that was foolish of me. On the surface, all seems fine. Military third-person shooters were pretty common back in this era, so I was expecting the standard stuff of slowly working through a series of combat scenarios, maybe some light squad mechanics, and a tough but fair tactical shooting experience. What I found instead was a fairly basic and clunky shooter that didn't even feel like the shootouts were carefully constructed, but more just slapped together. Let's start with the main flaw here because it's a big one. The shooting is terrible. Now, in all fairness, it does feel like it was made for a mouse and keyboard at first, and then ported over to console, but why anyone thought this was acceptable to release without tweaking things a little, I will never know. The aiming reticle is all over the place when you're trying to target an enemy, so while the challenge of a game like this should be ensuring you're in cover, or that you don't push too far forward and get swarmed by enemies, the challenge instead is actually just being able to hit another soldier. I tried numerous weapons to see if I was suited more to one than the other, but sadly, whether I picked up an assault rifle, SMG, sniper rifle, or even an RPG, it always felt like my character had the shakes. So if you can get past the poor controls, I'd like to tell you that there's some interesting missions and objectives here, but no, not really. Don't get me wrong, plenty of games in a war setting have based their missions around taking over an enemy base or blowing up enemy resources, but blowing up bales of hay, well, that's a unique approach, I guess. I feel like all of this would be fine if the dodgy aiming didn't make everything a struggle to get through, but then again, even if the shooting was fine, there is a noticeable lack of polish to the game when you spot 5 or 6 enemies spawn in from the same place. The game doesn't feel like a bunch of planned out action set pieces, instead it feels like they created a bunch of environments and then hastily chose a few spawn points for the AI to mindlessly run into battle from. None of it is exciting in the slightest, and even when you turn the difficulty down to easy to maybe squeeze a bit of carefree fun out of it, it is still a bit of a bore fest. I should also mention that in between missions you do return to a sort of hub area that gives you the opportunity to chat to other soldiers about the recent or upcoming mission, and oddly you can also buy drugs and other useless items. Oh yes, and also you can have sex with random women from Vietnam, and that's about all I can tell you because I never took up this offer.
Hey. Maybe you'd like a pass to catch some boom boom with one of those lovely local ladies. Good time when you can afford it.
Possibly the most exciting part of the game for me was occasionally coming across the booby traps, not because of the disarming minigame that you have to take part in, but more because I knew I was 100% going to fail, and I found that pretty amusing every damn time. The biggest shame about all of this is that Shellshock Nam 67 is genuinely a really nice looking game for its time. It's got some great looking character models with a lot of sharp detail, its environments are well constructed with some good textures, fantastic draw distance, and vegetation that brings things to life a little more, and even though a lot of the areas do look sort of bland due to the game's setting, what is there is really impressive. The tech on display here was most likely used to make the first Killzone, so I guess this test run wasn't a complete waste, but as you work through the game, you can't help but feel like they really could have had something here if the rest of the game didn't feel so rushed. Where it does drop the ball ever so slightly once again is the sound design. One of the main things that stood out to me was just how quiet everything felt. There's plenty of gunfire of course, but there was something odd about not having any form of soundtrack to back this up. This could have been a stylistic choice, but for some reason my brain noticed that it wasn't there. The rest of the sound effects are pretty much on par. I don't have any complaints about the sound of the weapons or the ambient noises like birds and animals that inhabit the area. Voice acting is very hit and miss, with those speaking English sounding fine and the Vietnamese characters speaking English not so fine.
Don't hurt me, G.I. Don't hurt me!
Okay, time to wrap this up. Do I recommend this game for your collection? Well, I think we all know the answer to that question, but in case you were still wondering, it is an absolute no. Right off the bat, it's hard to control, which makes it a real struggle to have a good time as you wrestle with the aiming for the entirety of its 4 to 5 hour campaign. You will drift off during cutscenes, you'll mostly be confused about what your objective actually is, and even though you'll admire its visuals, you'll discover quite quickly that this game is a waste of an engine and a waste of your time.